Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, the U.S.-led military campaign against Iran has some analysts worried it could drain ammunition and missile stockpiles needed to deter China's ambitions over Taiwan. Does Operation Epic Fury compromise U.S. deterrence in the Pacific? Ramping up internet censors, checking military personnel's loyalty, and multiple secret meetings. Insider accounts on how U.S. Israeli strikes on Iran has Beijing afraid of losing its own grip on power. $100 million in Venezuelan gold has arrived in the U.S., but it's about more than gold. Washington is looking to secure Venezuela's rare minerals and counter Beijing's influence in critical resources. And politically connected elites in China have been hiring women in America to carry their children who can later vote in U.S. elections. More on China's exploitation of birth tourism in the U.S. The U.S.-led military campaign against Iran is raising concerns that America's weapons supplies could be strained as intense combat continues. Some analysts warn the ripple effects could affect U.S. military readiness elsewhere, especially in the Indo-Pacific. The concern is that the operation could drain ammunition and missile stockpiles needed to deter China, particularly if tensions over Taiwan escalate. So how are officials responding to those concerns? Take a look.
You know, Russia and Iran provide about equal amounts of oil at a discount price to China. So you have two bad actors funding China's build out of weapons and then using the money that they get from China to build out theirs. And so while it has tremendous economic ramifications, even the economic ramifications have national security ramifications. That's why you cannot put these conflicts into a silo. You have to put them in the context of what's going on politically, not to mention Xi Jinping's waking up today going, I don't think we're quite ready for a fight with the United States.
We've got no shortage of munitions. Our stockpiles of defensive and offensive weapons allow us to sustain this campaign as long as we need to. Again, our munition status only increases as our advantage increases.
Well, according to a report by Nikkei Asia, consulting firm Bauer Group Asia issued a memo last Friday warning of potential challenges for the U.S. military. The memo says a prolonged war with Iran could slow the U.S. from shifting resources to the Indo-Pacific, limiting the weapons and personnel needed to maintain a strong deterrence there. It also notes that high-intensity combat could delay the production and delivery of critical munitions, which raises concerns about the Pentagon's readiness in other strategic regions. But in a Senate hearing last week, U.S. Undersecretary of War for Policy Albert Colby downplayed concerns over shrinking munitions after strikes on Iran. He said it doesn't signal weaker U.S. deterrence in the Taiwan Strait. Colby also stressed that the U.S. is rebuilding production capacity and urged allies to take responsibility for their own defense. Taiwan reportedly has over $20 billion in pending U.S. weapons orders. The delivery has been delayed due to capacity limits at American defense contractors. At the same time, China continues to build up its military, announcing another 7% increase in its military budget last week. Insiders say Beijing is afraid strikes on Iran will spur an uprising in China. NTD's Flora Hua has more on what officials have been doing to maintain its own grip on power.
It's been a tough week for high-level officials in Beijing since the U.S. and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury on Iran. According to a source close to Beijing's Politburo, the top governing body of the Chinese regime, high-level officials have been called to multiple secret meetings on Iran. The source shared that officials were instructed to draw lessons from the Soviet Union's collapse. It's worth noting this type of historical comparison is a rarity for internal meetings within the CCP. The source also shared that the CCP is on high alert, concerned domestic unrest could evolve into large-scale protests against Beijing, like the mass protests against the Islamic regime. Several separate sources confirmed the similar message. Due to safety fears, they prefer to stay anonymous. NTD previously reported that protests varying in scale continue to break out across China, mainly caused by financial disputes and social injustice. Police were directed to suppress many of these protests. In January alone, protests occurred in 19 provinces in China, 2/3 of all provincial regions. Flora Hua, NTD News.
Sources told the Epoch Times that the party doesn't want private discussions comparing Iran's current situation with domestic affairs. Authorities have ordered more ideological reports from various military operation theaters. Chinese officials are calling on military personnel one by one, asking them to clarify their stance on Iran. The regime considers the killing of Iran's former leader Ali Khamenei one of the most significant geopolitical shakeups in the past 2 decades. That assessment comes from a source who previously oversaw propaganda affairs for the Chinese regime. Rare minerals from Venezuela lands in the U.S. Washington has received $100 million worth of gold. That's after it issued a license letting American firms work with a state-run gold miner in Venezuela. The move comes as the U.S. aims to expand access to Venezuela's rare minerals and reduce reliance on China for key resources. Here's U.S. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum speaking on Fox News Sunday.
Venezuela's got $500 billion of resources of gold, but they've also got other critical minerals, bauxite for aluminum, which we need for defense and for consumer goods. They've got coal resources that can be used to help generate power, to help us win the AI arms race with China. So they're rich, rich, rich in minerals.
The license was issued after Burgum's meetings last week with Venezuela's acting president and more than 24 U.S. mining executives. Many of those companies had operated in Venezuela in the past. Under the license, American firms can work with Minervin when barring foreign adversaries, including Russia, Iran, and North Korea, from doing business with them. The move is part of the Trump administration's efforts to counter China's dominance in critical minerals. The minerals Venezuela is rich in are used in everything from defense systems to everyday modern phones and electric vehicles. Global arms trade is rising, driven largely by Russia's war in Ukraine and growing tensions with China. That's according to a report Monday from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. The think tank says global arms transfers rose about 9% over the past 5 years compared to the previous period. Ukraine became the world's top arms importer after Russia's invasion 4 years ago, jumping from almost 0 to nearly 10% of global purchases. Across Europe, arms imports more than tripled, with about half of those weapons coming from the U.S. In Asia, India ranked second worldwide in arms imports, fueled by border tensions with China and Pakistan. China is also a major exporter, sending more than half of its weapons to Pakistan, while planning to increase its own military spending this year by about 7%. Other countries are responding as well. Japan boosted its arms imports by 76%, with most of it coming from the U.S. It's been ramping up military spending amid growing tensions with China after Japan's prime minister said an attack on Taiwan could trigger military response. And Taiwan increased purchases by more than 50% as it aims to deter Chinese aggression. Meanwhile, a $13 billion U.S. arms package for Taiwan may be delayed as Washington prepares for talks between President Trump and China's Xi Jinping. Lawmakers are raising concerns that a Chinese student group is working on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party to undermine national security and free expression. They're asking the U.S. State Department to take action. NTD's Melina Weiskup reports.
The Chinese Students and Scholars Association, or CSSA, operates around 200 chapters at U.S. colleges. Lawmakers say the group is actively advancing the Chinese Communist Party's interests through harmful and disruptive activities that chill free expression, undermine academic freedom, and raise serious national security concerns. It's documented that the CCP funds initiatives for the student group. In a now deleted post, University of Pittsburgh CSSA said it was given $6,000 every year. A former CSSA treasurer and vice president from Northwestern University told the Epoch Times, "They give the money and you do the work. It's just that simple." During the 2023 U.S.-China Summit, CSSA members gathered to welcome Chinese leader Xi Jinping, describing it as a glorious mission. Chinese officials often appear at CSSA events and have encouraged attendees to tell China's story well. Lawmakers say the groups are used to monitor, control, manipulate, and direct Chinese students abroad. They insist the CCP's exploitation of America's openness must come to an end. Chairman of the Committees on Education, Foreign Affairs, and China now asking the State Department to designate the group as a foreign mission. If designated, CSSA chapters would need to first get the government's approval to hold public events in the U.S. The lawmakers say the designations do not even begin to scratch the surface of Beijing's influence in intelligence networks. Around 22 Chinese entities have been designated as foreign missions as of 2024. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
China is exploiting birth tourism in the U.S. to increase its long-term political influence. That's according to investigative reporter Peter Schweitzer. He joins American Thought Leaders host Yanya Kellogg to break down how politically connected elites in China hire women in the U.S. to carry their children who could later vote in American elections. Let's take a look.
A big part of what you talk about when it comes to the CCP's weaponization of migration is this birth tourism. Yes. So I mean, fascinating, shocking, and deeply disturbing examples. But here's the rub, right? You suggest, I think, that it could be there's 1 million American citizens, 500,000 to 1 million American citizens who have their allegiance to the Chinese Communist Party. Could be. Yes. And how do you get that number? I mean, that's a really large number of people.
I agree, it's a really large number of people, and I was shocked by it. The birthright citizenship issue to me is really central because it is a massive vulnerability and it's something that can be fixed. We'll see what the Supreme Court is going to settle on this, but the important thing I think for people to understand is the Chinese government, the CCP, is using birth tourism on an industrial scale. They are exploiting it on an industrial scale. So what do I mean? Well, any numbers that we have related to how many Chinese nationals are flying to the United States, giving birth here, and then flying home with the baby, raising them in communist China, and then when they turn 18, they're going to be citizens, they can vote and do everything. Our federal government has no idea. We don't track this information because you're given a birth certificate when your child is born here, whether you're an American citizen, whether you're a Chinese birth tourist, you get a birth certificate does not list the nationality of the parents. Nobody tracks this. So our federal government says we have no idea. The number of 500,000 to 1 million, maybe more, comes actually from China. The Chinese government has looked at this and estimates, the Chinese government and some research firms say that over the past roughly 13 years, you have anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 Chinese nationals a year doing this for 13 years, which is stunning. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence to support this in addition to the data from China. Reports of, these flights from Los Angeles, LAX to Shanghai, where the entire business section is largely populated by newborn babies. So it's a huge problem. And I think we have to dispel the idea that birth tourism or birthright citizenship, I should say, is just something, somebody comes across the border, they make a life here, they're here for 20 years, they have a couple of kids. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about very systematic, and we're talking about something China did in Hong Kong for a while. It reached the point around 2010 that half of all newborns in Hong Kong were Chinese nationals getting birthright citizenship in Hong Kong. The government had to stop it. The government in Hong Kong at that point had to stop it because they said this is subversion. We can't allow this to go on. Something similar is playing out in the United States.
And you're saying that these other research firms are kind of confirming the Chinese numbers because both you and I know that we can't put a lot of stock in the Chinese numbers.
Yes, exactly. And what's interesting about that, you're right. You think, okay, the Chinese government's saying this. If anything, I would believe the Chinese government would want to understate the numbers. So the fact that the Chinese government's saying 50,000 a year, the fact that these research firms are saying 100,000 a year, one research firm said that in just a single year, I think it was 2018, they said there were 150,000. Now, I don't know if those are, completely accurate, but those are the only numbers we have. And again, all of these sources would have reasons to sort of underestimate these numbers. And it would be fitting with China's methodology, which is very smart, very sophisticated at exploiting the weaknesses of countries that it regards as enemies. And that's certainly the United States would fit in that category.
I mean, You're making me think of how we've had to try to estimate the numbers of these forced organ harvesting victims in China, because over there it's a state secret in this case, right? The real numbers. So you have to say, well, how many hospitals have been built? How many beds are in those hospitals? There's some of these numbers do exist that are focusing exclusively on transplants, or how many wards, and eventually you kind of glean some sort of horrible estimate, right?
Yes.
Which is what we've done, but we should be doing better with our statistics here. It's kind of unbelievable what you're telling me, because, you know, it's not like it would be hard to gather that data if you chose to.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, exactly. And what it really comes down to is local governments who are issuing birth certificates, locations of birth. Nobody's collecting that data, and nobody is including the nationality of the parents.
Coming up, President Trump asked leaders from a dozen countries in the Americas to eradicate cartels, saying there's no tolerance for foreign influence in the region. How this ties into U.S.-China power competition in the Western Hemisphere. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump signed a proclamation with some leaders from the Americas on Saturday. The proclamation aims to build a fighting force to dismantle cartels and prevent foreign countries from gaining influence in the region. Worth noting, a few of the countries at the signing have significant relationships with China. What does strengthening ties with them mean for the U.S. influence in the Western Hemisphere? NTD's Arlen Richards spoke with Marcus Shankis, the editor-in-chief of the Epoch Times Brazil, and Michael Lucci, founder and CEO of State Armor, for insight.
Before we begin, let's listen to some of the president's remarks on the foreign interference.
So, and as these situations in Venezuela and Cuba should make clear under our new doctrine, and it is a doctrine, we will not allow hostile foreign influence to gain a foothold in this hemisphere. That includes the Panama Canal, which we talked about. We're not going to allow it. And together we'll protect our sovereignty, our security, and our cherished freedom and independence.
Now, Michael, your reaction to the president's action here?
I think that this action is an application of the Don Road Doctrine, but also of American grand strategy. What the United States wants to do is to be hegemonic or totally dominant in certain areas of the world, and for no one else to be dominant in any other areas of the world. So, of course, starting with the Western Hemisphere, with our friends, partners, and allies in Central and South America, the goal is to eliminate communists and cartels. Those are the two major threats to our hemisphere. And we're seeing the socialist communist regime of Venezuela has been changed. Cuba is probably soon to come. And the drug cartels that are murdering thousands of Americans every year are under pressure throughout Central and South America. That will establish American deterrence across our hemisphere. It'll drive out the Russians, the Chinese communists, Hezbollah terrorists who've also found a foothold across the Western Hemisphere.
Now, Marcos, in the backdrop to all of this is the Iran war. And when it comes to foreign interference, you've mentioned that not just China, but even Iran has had its hands in this hemisphere. So give us an idea of how much influence they've had in Latin America.
Sure. So Iranian influence has been widespread in Latin America. We can talk about Hezbollah and other groups that are backed by the Iranian regime, trading in arms and drugs with criminal groups throughout the region, including Colombia's FARC throughout the years, and also the First Capital Command in Brazil, among others. We can also expand that to the biggest terrorist attacks in the history's region, 1992 and 1994 in Buenos Aires. Those were actively planned by Hezbollah, backed by Iran, including one man who used to work in Iran's embassy in Argentina, a man named Mohsen Rabbani, which has also been detected going through the region, entering through Venezuela, and going through Brazil and other countries in the region for terrorism recruitment. We can expand that as a security threat to the United States. For instance, in 2007, the FBI thwarted last minute a terrorist plot to blow up fuel stocks, fuel terminals in JFK Airport in New York. It was being planned through Hezbollah and Iran, coming from Guyana and Venezuela. So this just gives you a gist of the scale of their operations. In Venezuela especially, we can also talk about investigations that allude to the possibility of uranium being trafficked from Latin America to Iran.
Now, Michael, how does this foreign influence translate to risks to U.S. national security?
Well, what we saw during the last 4 years before President Trump was that there was this endless flow. Maybe 10 million people crossed our border. Many of these people were identified as terrorists or associated with the Chinese military, associated with Hezbollah, associated with other groups that pose us real significant threat. As friends and allies in Central and South America align with American policy of preventing sort of the growth of cartels, drug cartels, and the Chinese Communist Party, Russia, Hezbollah throughout our hemisphere, that will lessen the threat significantly over time, structurally, not just as a one-off, because you'll have alliance and alignment between the United States and our partners throughout Central and South America. So overall, this will just enhance the security of everyone, whether it's through greater control of our border or just less terrorism and cartel activity across our hemisphere.
Now, Marcos, some of these countries that attended, like Panama and Bolivia, have significant relationships with China and even Iran. And of course, we're now seeing a shift on this front in some cases. So something to note is that Mexico and Brazil didn't attend this summit. Will this coalition eventually need their support to fully secure the Western Hemisphere?
I mean, when you're talking Mexico, Brazil, and also Colombia, which is a notably absent of the summit, if you want to really fight the cartels, you have to deal with those countries. If you want to counter China, you will have to deal with those countries. When we talk the cooperation between the Chinese Communist Party and Mexican cartels to essentially flood the United States with fentanyl, of course, you will need Mexico to be in there. When we talk about the greatest cocaine producer in the world, that's of course Colombian cartels. And when you talk about key ports that are used to traffic cocaine worldwide, you're also talking about Santos and Paranaguá, among other ports in Brazil. So the U.S. will eventually need to have those countries on board. It's interesting because when we talk about the national security strategy that was published last year and the overall national security documents of the current administration, you're talking about 2 axes of action. So, of course, it's preferable if you have leaders that are politically aligned, like Nayib Bukele or Javier Milei in El Salvador and Argentina, respectively. But it also talks about the possibility that you can pressure or work with partners who are not that aligned in their political tradition to try to make things work out. And I also think that we're seeing this sort of pressure play out very heavily in both Colombia, Mexico, and also, of course, Brazil.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.